light, and not the man holding the page. Behind the counter, a woman in a gray dress watched him. She could let him go on pretending, the way the whole county had let him pretend for years. Or she could cross the 3 steps of plank floor between them and change a thing that had stood unmoved for half a lifetime. Her feet moved before he could brace himself. "Stay with me to the end of this one, and tell me down below the town you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled." It had been a dry summer in the Texas Hill Country, the kind that turned the live oaks gray with dust and pulled the creeks down to strings of warm green pools. Levi had ridden in from the Crane place, 160 hard acres of limestone and cedar and stubborn grass, to fetch flour and shells, and to do the thing he hated most in the world, which was to stand at Hannah Doyle's counter and ask, without seeming to ask, whether anything had come for him. Something always had. He could feel the small stack of it through the wood, a year and more of envelopes he could not open and could not throw away, each one a little weight pressed against his ribs. He had buried a wife in that country, 3 springs back. Ruth had been the one who read to him at night by the lamp, low and easy, so that the marks on the page became her voice and the shame went quiet. When the fever took her, it had taken the only door he had into the written world, and he had shut that door behind her and learned to live in a smaller house. He signed his name with an X. He memorized the labels on tins by their colors. He nodded when men read notices aloud at the feed store and laughed half a beat after everyone else. It was a great deal of work, the hiding. It was, he sometimes thought, the hardest work he did. So when Hannah Doyle came around the end of the counter that evening, smelling of ink and lamp oil, he went stiff as a fence post and got ready to lie. "Mr. Crane," she said, very quietly so that the old men by the stove could not hear, "let me help you." 4 words. He had heard 1,000 sermons and never once felt the floor go out from under him the way it did then. His first thought was to bolt, to fold the letter, tip his hat and ride out into the dark and never come back. He had run from smaller things, but there was no pity in her face, and that was what undid him. He had armored himself against pity for years. He had no armor at all for plain, level kindness. "It's nothing," he said. "Light's poor." "The light is fine, Mr. Crane." She did not reach for the letter. She only stood there steady, as if she had all the time God ever made. "My husband couldn't read a word when I married him. I taught him by lamplight evenings, and we never told a soul. So I know the look of a man fighting a thing he's ashamed of, and I'd as soon spare you the fight if you'll let me." He found out later that her husband, Daniel Doyle, had drowned 2 years past in a flash flood that came down a dry draw faster than a horse could run, while she stood on the far bank with a lamp and could not reach him. He found that out later. Right then, all he knew was that this small, ink-stained widow had laid her own private hurt on the counter beside his, like a fair trade, and he could not for the life of him pick his up and walk away. "Samuel," he said at last, and his voice came out rough as a rasp. "It's from my brother, Samuel. He's been writing me near 2 years, and He stopped. I never sent a word back. He'll think I don't care for him. He'll think I'm the kind of man forgets his own blood." Hannah Doyle looked at the letter, then at him, and something moved behind her eyes that he would not understand for a long while yet. "Then we'd best answer him," she said. "Come round Thursday after I lock up. We'll start with the letter and then we'll start with you." She kept a buggy with a wheel that had been wanting attention since spring, and it chose that Thursday to want it badly, throwing the rim into a rut on the Cedar Bend road and cracking 2 spokes clean through. Levi found her standing in the heat with the buggy listing like a foundered ship and her mare blowing and cross. "I can get you home," he said. "Wagon slower, but it won't sink." The trouble was Preacher. Preacher was a mule the color of wet ash, with one notched ear and a soul like a locked safe, and he had bitten in his time the blacksmith, the deputy, 2 of the Ray's boys, a circuit preacher whose name had given the mule his own, and a man from San Antonio who'd offered to buy him. He had never once offered to bite Levi. "He won't be moved," Levi liked to say, By God nor man nor good sense. And it was true. You could lean on Preacher with your whole weight and he would simply stand, immovable, contemptuous, until he decided otherwise. He bites, Levi warned, handing Hannah up onto the wagon seat. Everybody, don't put your fingers near the front of him, the back of him, or the middle. That leaves very little of him. That's about the size of it. But Preacher only swiveled his notched ear back at her, decided she was beneath his attention, and walked. They went out of town slow, through the long gold light, the cedar smell thick and the limestone glaring white in the road, and somewhere in the second mile the talk loosened the way it does between two people who have already shown each other one true thing, and find the rest comes easier. He told her about the drought, about the well he'd dug by hand and the cattle he was carrying through on hope. She told him she'd come down from Tennessee with Daniel, that the post office had been Daniel's idea, and was hers now by the simple fact that nobody else wanted to learn the routes and the rates. He found she did not fill the silences with chatter. She let them sit, easy, and that was rare in a person and rarer in a woman folks called talkative. When the wagon crested the rise above the Doyle house, he reined Preacher in without being asked and sat a moment, not wanting the ride to end, and was surprised at himself for it. "You moved your shotgun," she said. "Ma'am." "When I climbed up, it was leaned against the seat and you set it down in the bed, but toward me before you took the reins, so it wasn't pointing my way." He hadn't known he'd done it. "Habit," he said. "You don't point a gun at folks." "No," she agreed, climbing down. "You don't." And she looked at him in a way that made the back of his neck go hot, and she went inside. And Levi turned Preacher for home with the curious feeling of a man who has set out for one thing and come back carrying another. By morning, Della Hartwell, who ran the general store and missed nothing that passed before her windows, had it that the widow Doyle and the Crane fellow had ridden out of town together, alone, in the dusk. By noon she had told 11 people. By supper it had grown a porch and a parlor and very nearly a preacher. Cedar Bend was a small town with a long winter coming and not enough to talk about, and Levi Crane, who had spent 3 years making himself invisible, found he had become, overnight, the most visible thing in the county. The lessons began in the back room of the post office, after the lamp in the front window was dimmed and the bolt thrown. She had a slate and a stub of chalk and the patience of stone. The first night he could not hold the chalk for the shaking in his hand. Not from drink, he was quick to say. He didn't touch it, but from something raw and close to fear. And she put her own hand over his, light, and steadied it, and they wrote the letter L together, and then the letter E, and by the time they had spelled out his own name he was breathing like a man who'd run a mile. "There," she said, "Levi Crane, that's you. Nobody can sign that but you now." He stared at the 4 shapes that were, somehow, himself. He had carried his name his whole life and never once seen it. "Ruth used to read to me," he said before he decided to say anything at all. "My wife, evenings. When she passed I quit even trying. Felt like the words were hers and I had no right to them anymore." He turned the chalk over in his fingers. "Samuel and me grew up dirt poor outside Lampasas. He went for schooling, I went for wages, and I never minded it till our mother died and Sam started writing me letters and I couldn't." His throat closed. 2 years of letters, Hannah, and I'd carry 'em home and set 'em on the mantel and look at 'em, and it was like he was talking to me through a wall I built with my own hands. She did not tell him it was all right, which he was grateful for because it was not all right. She only said, "Then let's tear down the wall a brick at a time," and moved the chalk back to the slate. It became the best part of his week, and then the best part of him. He found he could spell out a tin of peaches at the store now without sweating through his shirt. He found that the marks were not a code that other men knew and he didn't, but only a thing he had never been taught, the way he had never been taught Latin or the fiddle, and a man can learn what he was never taught if someone will sit with him and not laugh. The Rays children found them out, of course. Marisol Reyes was 9 and afraid of nothing, and her little brother Beto was 6 and afraid of everything but pretended otherwise, and they came scratching at the back door one evening with a hurt dog and stayed an hour. And after that they came most evenings, and the lessons grew to take in 2 more slates. Tamaz Rays had run cattle in that country since before the war, and there were men in Cedar Bend who would not buy from a Tejano and said so. And Levi had watched Tamaz carry that the way Levi carried his own thing, quiet, with his chin up, and had liked him for it long before they'd ever spoken 10 words. Now their children sat at Hannah's table sounding out their letters beside him, and Levi, who had thought himself done with the world, found the world had quietly let itself back in. "There's a harvest dance," he said one night when the children had gone and the lamp was low. He'd practiced the words on the ride-in and they still came out crooked. "End of the month, at the Hartwell barn. I'm no kind of dancer, and these," he held up his hands, "but I'd be, that is, if you'd let me walk you in, properly, where folks can see." She was quiet a moment. "Folks will talk, Levi." "Folks already talk. I'd as soon give 'em something true to chew on." And Hannah Doyle smiled at him, the first wide and unguarded smile he'd had from her, and said, "Then yes, walk me in." The Hartwell barn was hung with lanterns and crowded with the whole county, and a fiddle and a guitar and a German with an accordion sawed away in the loft with more heart than skill. Levi had shaved and put on his one good shirt, and when he and Hannah came in together the room hitched, just for a beat, the way a room does when it notices something, and then went on. He danced badly. He stepped on her hem and went the wrong way twice and nearly put them both into the cider table, and Hannah laughed and steered him, and somewhere in the third dance he quit trying to be graceful and only tried to be with her, and that worked better. It was during the catching of their breath, at the long plank tables, that the stranger came in. He was tall and easy and dressed too fine for a barn dance, in a coat the color of strong coffee and a watch chain that caught the lantern light, and he moved through the room shaking hands like a man running for something. Levi felt Tamaz Rays go still beside him. "Ambrose Sutter," Tamaz said low. "Come down from Fort Worth 3 weeks back. Buying beef for the railroad, he says. Pays top dollar, he says. Got half the county ready to sign with his syndicate. And the other half?" "The other half can read," Tamaz said, and Levi did not understand that yet, but he would. Sutter found his way to them with a fresh-poured cup and a smile that never reached the upper half of his face. "Mr. Rays, and you'd be the Crane outfit, I've heard the name. Hard country you're running. A man could carry a herd through a drought like this on railroad money and never feel the pinch." He set a folded paper on the table, casual, like a card laid down. "Contract's simple. I'll read it to you myself, save you the trouble. Gentlemen like us, we'd rather shake on a thing than squint at it." He said it kindly. That was the worst of it. He said it the way you'd offer to carry a load for a man you thought too weak to lift it, and his eyes flicked to Levi's hands, to the chalk dust still faint in the creases, and Levi watched the understanding arrive in the man's face, watched Sutter file away the fact that here was a rancher who could not read his own name, and watched the smile sharpen a hair, the way a knife sharpens, all the same shape but suddenly meaning something else. "Mr. Crane will read his own contracts," Hannah said, stepping in at Levi's shoulder. "Or his lawyer will. We're particular about paper where I come from." Sutter turned the full beam of his charm on her. "And you are?" "The postmistress. I read a great deal of correspondence, Mr. Sutter. You'd be surprised what comes through the mail about a man and his business. Surprised what doesn't add up." Something cooled in Sutter's face, fast, like a cloud over the sun. He recovered it in an instant, bowed over her hand before she could keep it from him, and said the pleasure was his and the night was young and he hoped they'd all do business soon. Then he drifted off to easier marks, and Tamaz let out a breath, and Levi looked at Hannah and saw she had set herself between him and that man without a flicker of hesitation, the way he had set the gun down in the wagon bed, and he thought, "There it is. That's the thing. That's what I won't walk away from." "You made an enemy," he said. "He was already going to be one," she said. "I just saved us the trouble of pretending otherwise." The trouble came the way Tamaz had said it would, soft at first. Levi's standing feed order at the Hartwell store was lost twice running. A notice went up at the courthouse. Levi heard about it third hand, claiming the spring on the north line of the Crane place had reverted to open water rights, which would have let any man's cattle drink it dry. And then on a Tuesday, Ambrose Sutter rode out to the Crane place himself, alone, friendly as a brother, with a fresh paper and a fountain pen and a story. The railroad, he said, was buying contracts now against next year's beef, paying cash up front, more cash than Levi had seen in a decade of dry years. All Levi had to do was sign. Sutter would read it to him, friend to friend, and Levi could make his mark, and the money would carry the herd clear through to spring. Levi looked at the paper. He could pick out now, a word here and there, could see his own name written in it twice, could see the word land, could see the word collateral and not quite know its weight but know it sat in there like a stone in a boot. He thought about the cash. He thought about the cattle dying on their feet at the dry tanks. He thought about how easy it would be, how the man's voice was so reasonable, how no one would ever know he hadn't read it. "Leave it with me," Levi heard himself say. "I'll sign it tomorrow." Sutter's jaw tightened just a fraction. "These offers don't keep, friend." "Then it don't keep," Levi said. "I'll sign it tomorrow or I won't sign it at all." That night he carried the paper into the back room of the post office and laid it on the table beside the slate, and his hands were shaking again, and Hannah did not put her hand over his this time. She slid the slate toward him. "Read it," she said. "Hannah, I can't read all that. It'd take me a week." "Then it takes a week. He told you it wouldn't keep because he needs you to sign it blind. A thing that's good for you keeps fine, Levi. A thing that won't keep is a thing somebody's afraid you'll understand." She tapped the paper. "Read me the part with your name in it twice. Just that, slow." It took him most of an hour, sounding it out word by word, her chalk filling in the ones that stuck. And when he got to the end of it, he sat back, gray in the face because he understood it now. The contract did not buy his beef. It loaned him money against his land at a rate that would eat the whole place in a year, and named Sutter the holder of the deed the moment a single payment came late, and the payments were built to come late. It was not a bad bargain. It was a trap dressed as a gift, and the bait was that Levi could not read. "He's done this before," Hannah said quietly, "hasn't he?" "You knew." "I suspected." She was quiet a moment, and then she did a thing he did not expect. She went to the front room and came back with a wooden box of letters, sorted and tied, and set it on the table, and her hands were not quite steady either. "Levi, there's something I've kept from you, and it's time I didn't." She drew out a bundle. "Your brother's letters, the ones you couldn't read. You weren't the only one who knew Samuel Crane's hand. He wrote me too." "Not me, I mean," he wrote the postmistress, "asking after you, 2 years of it. Asking was his brother well, was his brother getting his mail, would I look in on the Crane place and see was the man alive. I knew your name long before you ever stood at my counter, Levi. I knew you were a man with a brother who loved him and couldn't reach him through a wall. That's why I crossed the room. It wasn't pity. It was Samuel. He asked me to look after you, and I have been for 2 years without you ever knowing it." The room was very still. The lamp ticked. Somewhere out in the dark, Preacher shifted in his pen and was, for once, the most ordinary thing for miles. "Where is he?" Levi said. "Where's Sam now?" Hannah drew out the last letter, the newest, the one she had been holding back longest, and laid it in his hands. "That one came 2 months ago," she said gently, "from a man in Lampasas, not Samuel's hand." And Levi understood then, before he read a word of it, what the wall had cost him. He read his brother's last letter himself, the whole of it over 3 nights, with Hannah beside him and the chalk filling the gaps. Samuel had been sick a long time and had written even when his own hand failed, and the letters were not the angry letters of a man forgotten. They were only a brother talking, about the weather and the price of cotton and the people they'd known, talking into the silence, year after year, never once doubting that Levi would have answered if Levi only could. The last one, the one in the stranger's hand, said Samuel had asked at the end for someone to tell his brother he understood, that he'd always understood, that there was no wall Levi had to be ashamed of. Levi wept over that one, the only time Hannah ever saw him do it, and then he wiped his face on his sleeve and said, "All right, now we settle the other thing." The other thing settled itself in the open, which Hannah had said was the only place it could be settled, because a swindler lives in the dark and dies in the light. The circuit judge, Harlan, came through Cedar Bend the second week of the month, and on court day half the county packed the courthouse, because word had gone round, Della Hartwell had seen to that, and for once her tongue served a good turn, that there'd be a reckoning over the railroad contracts. Ambrose Sutter came in his coffee-colored coat, easy and smiling, certain that no man in that room could best him on paper. He had not reckoned on a man who'd learned to read at 35. Levi stood up when the judge called the matter, and his knees were water and his hands shook, and he laid the contract on the rail and he read it, out loud, slow, stumbling on the long words and pushing through them every clause, the loan and the rate and the deed and the trap in his own halting voice, so that the whole county heard in plain English what the paper actually said as against what Sutter had told them all it said. It was not a fine speech. It was the opposite of a fine speech. It was a working man reading a hard document a word at a time, and there was not a sound in that courthouse but his voice. And when he came to the clause that handed his land to Sutter at the first late payment, a low growl went round the room, because there were a dozen men in there who'd already signed the same words on Sutter's say-so. Then Levi took up the pen, his own pen now, Hannah's gift, with a good steel nib, and beneath the contract in his own hand, in letters that any child in the Ray's family could have read, he wrote, "I, Levi Crane, do not agree to this, having read it myself." And he signed his name, not an X his name, the four shapes that were himself. Judge Harlan read the contract after that, and the others Sutter had taken, and the matter went the way such matters go when a clever man is caught in the light by an honest one. Sutter blustered about misunderstandings and gentleman's word, but every contract said the same thing in black ink, and a man cannot argue with a paper he wrote himself, read aloud by the very fellow he judged too ignorant to read it. The judge voided the deals. Some of the signers got their handshake money clawed back. All of them got to keep their land. Ambrose Sutter left Cedar Bend 3 days later, ahead of more questions than he had answers for, and the county did not mourn him. "You didn't fire a shot," Tomas Reyes said to Levi after, out on the courthouse steps, grinning. "You just read at him till he fell over." "Cheapest ammunition there is," Levi said. "Hannah taught me to load it." He married her in the spring, in the white church at the end of Cedar Bend, when the bluebonnets had come up thick along the road, and the live oaks had gone green again with the late rains. Marisol Reyes lettered a banner that said Crane and Doyle in careful hand, and hung it crooked over the door, and the whole county turned out, because a wedding was the best entertainment the country offered, and because they had, somewhere along the way, decided that the postmistress and the reading cowboy were theirs. Della Hartwell cried and denied it. Preacher the mule, hitched outside, bit a man from San Antonio who'd come for the cattle market and wandered too close, and everyone agreed some things would never change. Levi's hands were steady when he took her own. He had practiced his vows off a paper he had read for himself, and he said them clear, every word. And when the preacher asked did he take this woman, he said, "I do," in a voice that carried to the back pew, where Samuel was not, and where Levi felt him anyway. They gave him a thing to do that summer that he'd never have dreamed of. On Sundays after church, in the shade of the big oak by the courthouse, Levi Crane stood up and read the week's notices aloud to the town, the land sales and the lost stock, and the letters come for folks who couldn't fetch them, slow and plain and patient, so that no man in that county would ever again sign a thing he didn't understand because he was too ashamed to ask. Some of those who came to listen could read fine. They came anyway. There is a particular thing in watching a man do, easily and in the open, the thing that nearly broke him in the dark, and it is good for a town to see it. "Any regrets?" Hannah asked him one evening, the way you ask a thing you already know the answer to. They were on the porch of the Crane place, watching the light go long and gold over the cedar, Preacher grazing contemptuously in the near pen. Levi thought about it honestly, because she taught him that too, to look a thing full in the face before he answered it. He thought about Ruth, and about Samuel, and about the 2 years of letters he'd let go by, the wall he'd built and lived behind, all the small daily labor of pretending he was whole when he was only hiding. He thought about how long he had let his shame keep him silent, and how the silence had not protected one single thing he loved. Only that I didn't let somebody help me sooner, he said. Years I spent fighting a thing alone that wasn't ever mine to fight alone. Took a woman crossing a room and 4 words to show me. He turned his brother's last letter over in his hands. He kept it in his breast pocket now, folded soft, and could read every line of it by heart and by sight both. I always thought asking for help was a weak man's move. Ruth's gone, Sam's gone, and I near let this place and you go too, all to keep from saying 3 words out loud. What words? Help me? He said it easy now, like a man who'd learned the shape of them. That's all it ever was, help me. Turns out it takes more sand to say that than to die quiet. Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat while the dark came down soft over the hill country, and the stars came out one by one over a man who had been silent 35 years, and had finally, at 36, found his voice. Not because he'd grown strong enough to carry his burden alone, but because he'd grown brave enough to set it down where someone could help him lift it. The letter was warm against his chest. The marks on it were just his brother talking, the way they'd always been, only now Levi could talk back. And in a small house on 160 hard acres of limestone and cedar, 2 people who had each learned the long way that pride is a poor companion in the dark sat together in the easy quiet of those who have nothing left to hide, while a contemptuous mule grazed in the gathering night, unmoved, as ever, by God nor man nor good sense, but moved, just a little, by the only hand that had never once been raised against him.